Hi, class. I want to welcome you to the Middle East class, Introduction to the Middle East and Islam. And today we want to talk about the Ottomans. And if we had enough time, if I could have prepared the lesson for the Safavids, we would talk about them as well. But I couldn't get that far. I tried, just didn't happen. But we'll just go with it. At least we'll hit the Ottomans pretty hard today. So now, last time, if you remember, we talked about the Abbasid Caliphate. And I had mentioned to you or taught you that when the Christians came back in the Reconquista and took back Andalusia, Al-Andalusia, took it back, or Spain back from the Muslims, they found that the people in the 12th century, when these knights took it back, they found the beautiful cities like Lisbon and Toledo. And the people conquered were more educated and civilized in some ways, many ways, than the conquerors. In fact, they found great architecture, and they found that the people were well versed in law, philosophy, mathematics, you name it. And they had so many books in their libraries, hundreds of thousands. And they had books that had been lost. The people in Europe had heard about, but they hadn't seen or read themselves, like Aristotle's treatises, his Physics on the Heavens, a History of Animals. And these books were quintessential to scholars to help lay a foundation for understanding and knowledge that would explode during the Renaissance, at least for Europe. And remember that before the Renaissance in Europe, there was the Muslims had their own Renaissance in Baghdad and in Spain, and so and then when Archbishop Raymond comes along, and he finds this beautiful city and these libraries full of books and these people that are very educated and learned, with the help of local Muslims and Jewish scholars, he'll have the books translated into Latin. And for medieval Christians, reading these books for the first time, it was like this is what took. Now, the Muslims, when Europe is languishing in darkness and there's very little understanding and very few inventions, and in the Muslim world there was a Renaissance, and even though they would eventually fall, that baton of knowledge would be taken from the Muslims to the Europeans and then carried in to create what was called a Renaissance. And I think that's very, very important to remember. And so we called that the translation movement, when they were translating all these Greek books, all the books of the world they could find of any language. And then they restored the truth of the knowledge to this knowledge that was lost to a lot of the Europeans was given to the Arabs and to the Muslims. And the restored truth and knowledge eventually got to the Europeans. And then that truth initiated a Reformation. And the Reformation was prerequisite to the Restoration. So and so that's, to me, I just show you that God has never quit working with His people on the earth. He loves all His children on the earth, everywhere, and has worked with everybody. Well, let's talk about the Ottoman and the Safavid Empire. Before we do, though, I just want to take you on a little field trip to Turkey. I like to do this once in a while. I want you to go there, and I want you to have a feel for yourself for what it's like to be there.
taught me the courage of stars before you left. How light carries on endlessly, even after death, with sureness of breath. You explain the infinite. How rare and beautiful it is to even exist. I couldn't help but ask you to say it all again. I tried to write it down, but I could never find the pen. I'd give anything to hear you say it one more time, that the universe was made just to be seen by my eye. I couldn't help but ask you to say it all again. I tried to write it down, but I could never find the pen. I'd give anything to hear you say it one more time, that the universe was made just to be seen by my eyes. How rare and beautiful it truly is that we exist.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. It makes me want to go there so much. That's on my bucket list someday. I hope to go there, and I hope you get to go there as well. Well, let's talk about the history of Anatolia, what we now know as Turkey. Turkey is famous for a lot of reasons, not just to the Ottoman Empire, to Islam, but also to Christians, because as you know, Paul served 3 missions there, and Mongol leaders like Hulego, who conquered the Muslims, um, after he conquered, within half a century, his descendants, the Ilkhanid dynasty, they convert to Islam, and Hilego and his heirs, they'll lay the groundwork for a succession of military states, because eventually the Mamluks in Egypt and Syria will rise, and the Safavids in Persia and Iraq, and then the Timurids, who are in Central Asia later, also known as the Mughals, and then we've got the Ottomans in Turkey. Now, the reason I just showed that nuclear explosion is I wanted you to think for a minute about this question. In what way has the nuclear bomb changed the nature of war and peace? And I think that's an important question, and especially when we look at the Ottoman Empire, because the spread of gunpowder and firearms in the 14th century was as momentous a technology as the proliferation of nuclear weapons in the 20th century. So the origin of gunpowder and the firearms goes all the way back to 10th century. Chinese used it for gunpowder. They used gunpowder for fireworks, I should say. But it was in the Mongol era that they started to use it as an incendiary device. And then about the 1330 AD, Christians and Muslim armies in Spain will start to load it into their cannons, and then they'll fire these huge projectiles against fortifications. And the big guns back then, they were too clumsy to do a whole lot much harm to the soldiers, but they could block a cavalry charge by injuring or scaring the horses away. But by 14th, 15th century, Italian and German gunsmiths, they'll refine the weapons. And so the Mamluks, it's interesting, the Mamluks, they had them by 1365 AD, but they were very reluctant about using them. But the Ottoman Empire, different story. They will become one of the greatest gunpowder states. And and my point before we talk about the Ottoman Empire, I just want to point out that any European ruler who wanted to keep his territory or even survive had to use it. Firearms will transform the nature of European and Middle Eastern politics and society as well. And according to a concise history of the Middle East, any army or navy that failed to adapt the use of firearms in sieges and later in the battles, they got crushed. And so the need to recruit, train, and to pay foot soldiers will lead to the rise of central government, and it'll also lead to the fall of feudal lords who were still fighting on horseback to try to protect themselves with plates of armor and wild castles. So gunpowder will change the world as they know it. And the Ottomans were the ones that jumped on the wagon to take gunpowder and to move their empire all the way into the 20th century. So let's talk about Ottoman beginnings. Now, as you read in the book, in Brother Peck's book, the classification of Ottoman time periods, you could put them in these four categories: the beginning and expansion, the Golden Age, isolation and withdrawal, and then the European engagement. And we won't get to the European engagement today, but we will get to the first three. So let's talk about this first one. Now, I asked you before class, which country did Osman's family originate? And remember, the ancient legend traces the empire origins to the Turkic Kai tribe who fled westward from the Mongols in Khorasan. That was taught by Dr. Gierman. Now, the story of the Ottomans, it begins really, and so once they make their venture all the way to Anatolia or Turkey, it begins in Sogut. It's just a little mountain village in Anatolia, and the Rum Seljan Sultan who fought the Byzantines, who was already there in the late 13th century, when Kai chieftain Ertugrul and his 444 horses soldiers, they come and they help the Sultan, the Seljuk Sultan, and they help fight the battle, and they win. And so the Sultan will reward Ertugrul with what's called an ikta, and it just means a land grant. He'll give him a land grant in Sogut. I don't know if it's Turkish or Arabic, probably Turkish. Now, upon his death, the leadership will pass to his son, Osman, who was girded by a Sufi leader with a special sword. And this is the sword, same sword. It's still there. If you go to Turkey, you can see it, called the Sword of Osman. And the Sufi leader commanded Osman, he gave it to him and said, I want you to wage jihad against our Christian neighbors, the Byzantines. And so he took the title of Ghazi, which just means warrior for Islam. And from that time on, empires until the end of 1923, every Osman leader, every one of Osman's descendants who is a leader, a sultan for the Ottomans, they would gird themselves with a sword, and then they would protect Islam, protect their countries. And if you go to the Topkapi Palace and Museum in Turkey, you can see it today. It still hangs there with other things. And yeah. So one of the things I asked you, the pre-class question were, what were some of the characteristics of the Ghazi warriors, and where could they not expand? And just a couple of thoughts. Remember, they considered themselves warriors for the faith, or Ghazis, and they felt like their destiny was to bring Islam to the world. That was just at least one or two things about them. They were brave, and there were some other things that were said in the video, but they kind of had a code of chivalry, kind of like the Bushido in Japan. It was called the Futuwa, and it just means youthful manliness. And you could kind of compare it to the samurai warriors. And the just remember well, not remember, but the samurais, they emphasize sincerity, frugality, loyalty, martial arts mastery, honor until death. And these futuwa, these youthful men, they will do the same in Anatolia. And so I want to show you this video clip by Dr. I'm forgetting his name, but he's Turning Points in the Middle East is the name of the series. You can get it on Amazon.com. And I want you to just hear. I love how he tells this legend, this tradition of how Osman became the leader. So here we go.
After inheriting his father's title, Osman was staying one night with a family friend and prominent Muslim religious authority, Sheikh Edebali. Osman's pleas to let him marry the Sheikh's daughter had been rebuffed by the older man. But this night, after falling asleep, we're told that Osman had the following dream. Now, as this is the central foundational myth of the Ottoman Empire, it's worth hearing in some detail. In his dream, Osman saw himself and Sheikh Edebali next to each other. Suddenly, a full moon emerged from the Sheikh's chest, rose into the sky, and then descended into Osman's own chest before disappearing. This was followed by the appearance of a beautiful tree, which kept growing larger and stronger and more beautiful. The tree grew so large that its shade stretched far to the horizon in 3 directions. Under the tree, 4 mountain ranges arose: the Caucasus in Eurasia, the Atlas in North Africa, the Taurus in Anatolia, and the Balkans in Europe. Then Osman saw 4 rivers sprouting from the base of the tree, namely the Tigris, Euphrates, Danube, and Nile. After this, he envisioned plentiful harvests and traders coming in ships from all corners of the earth. And then the leaves on the tree turned into swords, which were blown by a mighty wind until they all pointed towards Constantinople. This great city, lying between 2 seas and 2 continents, looked to Osman like a diamond set between 2 sapphires and 2 emeralds. It formed the most precious stone in a ring that would be a global empire. And just as Osman was about to put the ring on his finger, he woke up. Osman asked the Sheikh what his dream meant, to which the religious elder replied, "God Almighty has bestowed sovereignty upon you and your generation. My daughter will be your wife, and the whole world will be under the protection of your children." Now, every country has its founding myths, and the story of Osman's dream is as good as any. However, there's something we should add. Religious figures, such as Sheikh Edebali.
That's probably good enough. That's a great dream. Not only teaching him he's going to inherit the country, but he's going to be the great leader, but he's going to get the man's wife, because that's what he really wanted in the first place. For 9 years, the Turks will besiege the Byzantine city of Bursa and its stronghold, and the Osman never gets to see him take it, but while he lays dying, they take it. And that really will become the first real capital for the Ottomans, and that's what Bursa, Turkey looks like today. They'll also take Nicaea, which is where the Council of Nicaea 325 AD took place. That was the Roman Emperor Constantine's summer home. So, but let's talk about the next leader of the Ottomans, and that was Orhan, Osman's son. And he will expand the empire from Asia Minor. So the Byzantine Emperor John Cantacuzenus had internal fighting in his own kingdom. And also there was the bubonic plague was spreading there. And they're having a lot of struggles. So he'll invite Orhan to cross the Dardanelles, you can see there at the arrow, to make an alliance with them. And he'll seal the alliance by giving his daughter Theodora to Orhan. Now, That was a really strategic move for Orhan, but not for the Byzantine emperor, because Orhan will establish a bridgehead at Gallipoli, and that's you can see right there that those straits, or the Dardanelles Straits, that's a very strategic point, and just above that is the Bosphorus Straits, but this is a prelude to the eventual surrounding and fall of Constantinople about 100 years later, and so that was very, very advantageous for the Ottomans. Let's talk a little bit about Murad the First, who was the next leader. Orthan's son Murad the First, um, he'll conquer the Balkans, Thrace, Macedonia, Bulgaria, Serbia, and this is kind of a prelude to the eventual surrounding and downfall of Constantinople. They just keep closing in more and more. And the Ottoman conquests in the Balkans, they'll lead to centuries of Muslim rule in Eastern Europe. And rather than viewing these centuries as a constant tension, scholars and conflict scholars and historians refer to it as Ottoman peace. They call it the Pax Ottomana, because Murad had actually, there was actually more peace than there was war. And Murad had introduced what's called the Devshirme, or the Janissary Corps. Remember the Janissaries? The word Janissary is Turkish. It just means new soldier. And it just basically was Christian soldiers who were conscripted into military service under Devshirme system, or children collection. And they were trained as warriors. They were the core soldiers of the Janissaries. And this little video clip will give some more detail on that. So I'll just let you watch this for a second.
The Ottomans are known for including and synthesizing the cultural elements through the lands that they passed. They are known for creating structures by which the peoples who lived there before could carry on their lives and their beliefs in the way that they chose.
In fact, the Ottomans had fewer conflicts with their Christian subjects than those of their own faith. Muslim adversaries intent on challenging Ottoman rule.
One of the bureaucratic, or let us say management problems facing the Ottomans was that there were still rival Muslim sort of proto-kingdoms around them. I mean, they were conquered by the Ottomans, but they had old grudges to bear. And they had certain claims to dynastic glory of their own, and they were constantly worried about these old Muslim families rising up and creating a rebellion. And so the story goes that they felt it would be imprudent to have the army made up of these sorts of people. And so they wanted to recruit children who were not connected with any rival Muslim family. And so they went into the Balkans and they recruited primarily Christian children.
This practice was called devshirme. The young boys were technically slaves of the Sultan, but they weren't treated like slaves. First, they were brought into the Muslim faith, taught rituals of washing and prayer, and the Arabic and Ottoman languages. This served a political as well as a religious purpose. Through the devshirme system, the Ottomans could create a caste without any conflicting loyalties to tribe or family.
The children had such great future that a lot of the times Turks or even Muslims pretended that their children were Christian born and would register them with the devshirme officials. The system was so beautiful in that they only had one allegiance, to the Sultan. No family, no region, no other ties.
These children were then given the best possible education available in the world, perhaps, at the time. And they were then able to move into the highest positions of power in the empire.
Those who were brainy went to the palace schools and graduated into different levels of viziers and governors. It even became grand viziers. Those who were brawny went to the Janissary Corps.
The Janissaries were the Sultan's elite infantry. It was an army that would set the standard for centuries to come.
They were the strongest, trained as military machines, no fear of dying, totally fearless, and their only love was to serve the Sultan.
They were trained with all the precision and discipline, pomp and circumstance of a modern army. For the first time, an army wore uniforms and went into battle to the accompaniment of a military band. The Janissaries were the most feared troops in the Western world, a force that was worthy of this new Islamic empire and its restless visions of conquest.
So that was Murad I. That was probably one of the greatest contributions he made as a leader, a sultan of the Ottomans. So let's talk a little bit about the next ruler, Bayezid I. And yes, this is an Assassin's Creed picture for those of you that have wondering. I think I've seen that picture before. So this new Ottoman ruler, he'll start to besiege Constantinople in 1395. And the Europeans, they perceive that this is a real threat to Christianity. And so Hungary's king will lead the English, the French, the Germans, and the Balkan Knights and do a crusade against the Turks. Now the Christians were defeated at Nicopolis, and because of that, the Ottomans will emerge as the masters of the Balkans. And if Bayezid had maintained, if he'd have continued to keep fighting against the Christians, he probably would have took Constantinople. But he made a great mistake. In his eastward push, instead of just pushing west to the Christians, he started pushing east. And this angered Timur, who was invited into Anatolia by the dispossessed Turkish emirs. You see, he was trying to take over all of Anatolia. And because of that, they will come, and the armies of Bayezid and Timur will clash near Ankara in 1402. And the Ottoman Sultan, he'll be deserted by his Turkish friends and soldiers, and he was defeated, taken prisoner, and Bayezid will actually die in captivity. And four remaining sons, they will start quarreling over what was left of the Ottoman Empire. But it didn't fall completely. And in fact, this is where we come into the Ottoman Golden Age. And that's from 1453 to 1699. So the next great leader was Mehmet II. And Mehmet is a Turkish word for Muhammad. And a Greek vizier influenced him to attack Constantinople. And he'll build a castle on the European side. You see up there on the top of the picture, up there on the European side of the Bosphorus. It's called the Rumeli Hisari Castle. You can see a picture of it down on the right there. And the castle, this will facilitate Ottoman movement between Anatolia, Turkey, and also the Balkans of Europe. And a battalion of 400 Janissaries, they were stationed in the fortress there at the castle, and they placed these really large cannons there in the tower, one of the main towers on the waterfront. And after he completed the fortress, Mehmed proceeded to lay a levy and toll on ships that would pass through the region. And then one time, a Venetian vessel ignored the signals to stop, and it was sunk with a single shot. And all the surviving sailors that lived, they were beheaded, except for the captain, and he was impaled, and then he was mounted as a human scarecrow right there on the castle to warn further sailors that would come up and down the straits. And the castle, one thing about it, it cut off the Byzantines from aid they might have received from their Christian allies at Trebizond. You see Trebizond there on the right. It's a Black Sea port, and they would bring supplies to Istanbul, to Constantinople. And eventually, in 1453, Mehmet will he'll attack the city of Constantinople, and they call it Battle for Constantinople. And this basilica, this is from a movie you can watch. It shows how big the cannon was. It was nearly, I don't know if it was actually that big, but it was 27 feet in length, and it fired 600-pound stone balls. That's a big ball. So maybe the diameter of the inside of that cannon was actually that big. But they'll take the city, and the Muslims eventually change the name from Constantinople to Istanbul. They'll repopulate it with Turks and Greeks and Armenians and Jews. And the Greek patriarch gained civil and religious authority over the Orthodox Christians. And Monophysite Christians and Jews also received autonomy on under what's called the Millet system. And the Greek Orthodox Christians, like the Muslims ruling over them better than they did the Western Roman Church, because one of them said, "Better the turban of the Turk than the tiara of the Pope." Now that image, that mosque right there, that's called Hagia Sophia. Hagia Sophia, it just means holy wisdom. It's the mosque in Istanbul. It was once a Christian church. And Justinian the Great is the one that built it in 537 when he began building it. And it was converted into a mosque by Mehmet after he took Constantinople. And then later, in 1935, it was converted into a national museum by Kemal Ataturk. And today it has Islamic and Christian art and architecture in it. And you can go in there. I've not been there. It's on my bucket list, but that is one of the first places I want to go, because it's just beautiful. I've seen some pictures of it inside and out. And by the end of Mehmet's reign, here we go again, little special effects. He'll take Moria, southern Greece, Albania, and the coast of Croatia. In fact, in 1480, he'll land on the heel of Italy and threaten to march on Rome. And what will save Rome is Mehmet's death. And what's interesting, though, is what would have happened if Mehmet had lived longer? Would the Roman Catholic Church, would they have suffered the same fate as the Eastern Orthodox Church in Constantinople? We don't know. Would Europe be more Islam than Christian? We don't know. Historians will often throw that question out. Well, Salim and Suleiman the first have probably done the most to expand the Ottoman Empire and to make it great than probably any of the other rulers prior to them. And Suleiman, by the way, is just in Hebrew, it's Solomon. So I want to show a little video clip here that will help just kind of deepen some understanding about them right now.
The Ottoman rulers had long stacked up titles for themselves. Khan, which is Turkish for emperor. Shahi Shah, Persian for king of kings. And Sultan, the Arabic word for ruler. But now, with all the former Byzantine Empire under their command, Mehmet and his successors claimed yet another title, Holy Roman Emperor. The Ottomans had reached the gates of the West and were poised to push on towards what they now claimed as their ultimate destiny, the conquest of Europe. That quest would fall to the most legendary sultan of all. He was born at the beginning of the 10th century by the Muslim calendar, and he was the 10th sultan descended from Osman. He was a child of destiny, whose greatness was expected.
In the parlance of the day, he was the Sahib Quran, the universal ruler, the master of an auspicious conjunction, whose coming has been foretold, whose identity is confirmed astrologically.
His name was Suleiman, after Solomon, the wise king of the Old Testament. the Ottoman Empire would reach its apex under Suleiman's reign.
Suleiman was extremely well educated. He was trained to the Sultanate from the day he was born.
As a young prince, he formed a relationship that would have a tremendous impact on his life and on the empire as well.
And when he was still a crown prince, he also developed a great friendship with a convert, a Greek convert who took the name Ibrahim.
Suleiman was 26 when he took the throne, determined to make his mark on the world. The way to prove his mettle was on the battlefield. Every new sultan was expected to begin his reign by expanding the empire. Ottomans now controlled Kurdistan, Egypt, and the holiest cities of Islam, Mecca and Medina. Suleiman set his sights on Belgrade in Hungary, the stepping stone to Europe.
Belgrade was very important strategically because it was from there the army could move further on west.
A year later, he turned his ambitions on the island of Rhodes. The tiny island was a troublesome outpost of Christianity in an otherwise Ottoman sea. It was also a haven for pirates, preying on Muslim trade ships. The 50,000 defenders of Rhodes manned one of the strongest forts in the world. Suleiman decided on a tactic other than relying on gunfire from his huge cannons. Ottoman sappers dug out a series of 50 tunnels near the base of the fort so they could mine its foundations. The resulting explosion signaled a furious 6-hour Ottoman assault. But the Turks were beaten back. Then, after 145 days of siege, the exhausted Christian defenders finally negotiated a truce. The Ottomans had won. Victory did more than deliver Rhodes to the empire. Suleiman was now a sultan to be taken seriously.
So, just a little bit more about him. Suleiman, he is the Turkish, as I mentioned, the Turkish and Arabic rendering of Solomon, the Old Testament king. And his name is Solomon's name is kind of a byword for wisdom and good governance, because he took Israel to its greatest heights as a kingdom. And Suleiman was renowned for his innovative legal code, and also his opulence in the court, expanding, as you saw, the Ottoman Empire. And but even more than that, the romance of Suleiman and Roxolana is a love story that has inspired poets and artists and composers for centuries. We don't know a lot about her, but she was a Christian slave girl. She was born in Poland, and she entered the Sultan's harem as one of an unknown number of concubine girls. But she became Suleiman's favorite consort. And in a break to Ottoman tradition, an interesting thing, he married Roxolana, and then he granted her freedom as a slave. And so for the first time in Ottoman history, a concubine became a sultan's legal wife. And he would write all these poems to her. And one of them is this one right here. Throne of my lonely niche, my wealth, my love, my moonlight, my most sincere friend, my confidant, my very existence, my sultan, my one and only love, the most beautiful among the beautiful, my springtime, my merry-faced love, my daytime, my sweetheart, laughing leaf, my plant, my sweet, my rose, the only one who does not distress me in this world, my Istanbul, my Karaman, the earth of my Anatolia, my Bad Kashan, my Baghdad, and Khorasan. And then he would sign the poems, your Muhibi, and it just means your lover, your sweetheart. And Roxlana, it's interesting. After she passed childbearing age, usually they would just dispatch the woman back to the provinces, but instead she will stay by Suleiman's side, and she'll become one of the most influential female political figures of more than 600 years of Ottoman history. And she was the first sultana or sultan's wife, because she'll advise her husband as on quite a few things. And I want to say that there's one poem that Rod Stewart put into music in 1878. Just kidding. But he did inspire this soap opera called The Magnificent Century. It was set in the court of Sultan Suleiman, the Magnificent. And this soap opera has been breaking Turkish television records since its premiere in 2011. Every Wednesday, more than a third of primetime viewers in Turkey, they'll tune in to watch the latest 90-minute episode. And so, yeah, pretty interesting. Well, eventually the Ottomans will start to decline, and they go into a time period of isolation and withdrawal, and we're kind of at the tail end of the Golden Age. What initiates that is one of the battles called the Battle of Lepanto. The Ottoman navy at Lepanto in 1571, they're commonly identified as the first signs of decline of the Ottoman Empire. It's an interesting battle because I didn't know this, but Lepanto, it marks the last major engagement in the Western world to fight entirely between two rowing vessels. These galleys, they were just basic floating land, and then they would come up beside each other, and then the soldiers would jump on the ships and then just fight each other. And this was supposed to be the largest naval battle in Western history. It had over 400 warships, but the Ottomans will lose. But then there's the siege of Vienna and the period from the second stage of Vienna, 1683, until the invasion of Egypt by Napoleon Bonaparte. There'll just be a continual decline of the Ottoman Empire. But I want to say something that the siege of Vienna did an interesting little thing. I wanted to show you this little clip by Dr. Gierman.
Vienna is famous for many things, but for some, it's the city's cafe culture that's first among equals. And here too, the siege and Battle of Vienna has an important role to play. Among the plunder picked up by Sobieski's troops were sacks of coffee beans, which the Polish general gave to one of his men, who then established Vienna's first cafe. Although coffee shops had appeared elsewhere in Europe by this time, in Venice and Oxford, for example, it was the Viennese who took the art of brewing and filtering coffee to new heights, which they maintain to this day. And what better to go with a cup of coffee but a delicious buttery croissant, a pastry that was created, so the legend tells us, by a Viennese baker following the Ottoman defeat. As you recognize, a croissant is shaped like a crescent moon, the banner under which the Ottomans marched. Of all the culinary legend histories produced over the years, the story of the invention of the croissant has a ring of truth and at least some contemporary supporting evidence, as well as being a most delicious story.
So the Ottomans will lose control of Hungary after the Treaty of Karlowitz, and though they failed to take Vienna, what's interesting, one thing that happens is that the Ottomans will keep Charles V at bay from capturing Martin Luther and squashing the Protestant movement. And for us as Christians, this is so significant. There were a lot of things that stopped Martin Luther. I'm sure I should say that. Let me rephrase that. There were a lot of things that stopped Charles V he kept trying to get Martin Luther but different things kept happening, yeah, different hurdles kept coming in the way, and he had to jump this hurdle, and another one would come, another one. And the Ottomans attacking Vienna was just one of those hurdles. But all in all, it just kept them at bay, Charles V, I think, from getting Martin Luther, one of the reasons. And Martin Luther was essential to the Reformation, which again would lead to the Restoration. And I know that as I look at all these stories in history, um, uh, throughout all history, I see where God has been at work in preparing for the restoration of the true gospel of Jesus Christ in the last days. And I just want to bear testimony to you that I know that God is at work here, and He is the master, and He is. I'm so grateful for Him for being a part of my life, and I know that He lives. I know that Heavenly Father. I know that He is my Father, and I know that His Son Jesus Christ is my Savior, and they are in charge not only of this church but of this world and the people in it, and they love all of them. And I bear witness to that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.